Greetings and congratulations for all you have accomplished as graduates of the Dental Post-Baccalaureate program. I'm Don Tamaki, a lawyer in San Francisco. You're probably wondering why the hell I'm crashing your party. Folks, it's all Harvey Birdie's fault. Professor got you here on the pretext that this is his birthday celebration. No. He's got ulterior motives, but they're good motives because, as you know, Harvey's all heart. I'm one of the 9 members of the California Reparations Task Force, appointed by the governor and the legislature in the wake of the George Floyd murder to study and make recommendations on reparations for African Americans. Dr. Brody has supported the Reparations Task Force from day one because he understands that reparations, long overdue, is an extension of his lifelong commitment to racial equity. He knows that you understand not only what it means to be racially marginalized, but also what reparative programs can do to transform and empower excluded communities. For those reasons, he rightfully views you as having the ability, the lived experience, and the moral standing to move the needle of public opinion, to create the political will so that this time things can and will be different and better. A bit of history here. Enslavement began in North America in 1619 and continued for 246 years, propped up by using race to dehumanize and reduce African Americans to the level of cattle, to pigs and goats. In the words of Martin Luther King, thingifying them. The Civil War ended in 1865, but about 5 minutes after Robert E. Lee surrendered, the South was determined to reinstate laws and ways as close to slavery as possible. And no wonder. For 246 years, the U.S. had built one of the largest and most profitable slave economies in the world. The enslaved population was 4 million, and cotton was the economic engine for the entire country. The nation's constitution protected slavery and gave Southern states outsized political power. Half of the nation's pre-Civil War presidents once enslaved African Americans while in office. More than 1,700 congressmen representing 37 states once enslaved Black people. Following the end of slavery, this cultural norm, valuing white lives above all others, morphed into forms of hate and bias that put a target not only in the backs of African Americans, but other people of color. Simply put, if you can thingify Black people, then marginalizing other disfavored groups is easy. Slavery begat the cultural foundation of America's racial hierarchy of white folks on top, Black and Native people on the bottom, and everybody else somewhere in between. California entered the Union as a non-slave state, but it was plenty complicit with the institution of slavery. It was not a crime for enslavers to come into California during the gold rush and to bring their human property with them. California passed its own fugitive slave laws, and Jim Crow was imported into California. Did you know that California had its own sundown towns, including Glendale, Pasadena, Culver City, and Richmond? And it became a leader in redlining and racial segregation. The Bay Area communities were rife with exclusionary deeds, zoning, and other forms of discrimination. When my parents were incarcerated in America's concentration camps, along with 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry during World War II, merely because they happened to look like the enemy. The first place they were confined were the horse stalls at Tanforan Racetrack, San Bruno, turned into a temporary holding pen, surrounded by barbed wire and machine gun towers. They could not have missed the irony that the racetrack's restrooms and drinking fountains were separated by signs marked white and colored. In the 1940s, some 80% of the homes in Los Angeles had deed restrictions barring African American families from moving in. Between 1932 and 1962, 120 billion in federal loans helped create America's middle class, but 98% of those loans went to white Americans. In 1956, so-called urban renewal policies enabled San Francisco to condemn and tear down the Fillmore district, resulting in 20,000 African Americans being displaced and almost 900 Black businesses being destroyed. When you align the redlining maps of the 1930s through the 1970s, used by lenders to exclude African Americans from being able to get federally insured loans, and you align those maps with today's maps of the most impoverished, the most underserved, the most polluted neighborhoods, they align exactly. The past created our present. The Reparations Task Force published a sweeping, nearly 500-page report drawing a through line from the harm of 246 years of enslavement and racial terror, 90 years of Jim Crow exclusion, and decades more of continuing discrimination, resulting in today's outcomes, which are at once shocking but not surprising. With respect to housing and education, America is as segregated today as it was in the 1940s. Black people have shorter life expectancies, more prone to chronic diseases, and over the past decade, Black babies died at almost 5 times the rate of white babies in San Francisco. And huge disparities persist in housing, houselessness, policing, and criminal justice. The task force is now focusing on developing recommendations for remedies, including direct compensation, but mainly policy proposals for reforms in education, in healthcare, housing, criminal justice, and other areas to be submitted to the legislature on June 30th of this year, at which point the task force will sunset. Simultaneously, we are developing recommendations to educate the public as to why reparations is a justice issue and long overdue. Included in the proposals for reparations are policy changes in education to create pathways for African American students to enter college and graduate school and become healthcare professionals, among others. These proposals are similar to the post-baccalaureate program, which you know so well. Which brings me back to you. America needs to know that reparations is not a handout. It's not welfare. It is a debt owed for stolen lives, stolen wages, stolen land, stolen opportunities. America needs to know that the entire nation benefited from these unjust takings over the past 400 years, whether from enslavement, exclusion of African Americans from equal employment, the benefits of the New Deal, the loans or other wealth transfers, or from separating America into devalued Black neighborhoods and enhanced value white neighborhoods. Moreover, this debt is a collective one, just as any other debt that the nation incurred years, decades, or even centuries ago, such as from wars, public works, natural disasters, social security payments to seniors, or reparations for others. And America needs to know that there are reparative programs that actually work, like the one that you personify, that changes lives and thereby the systems and the culture that created the racial disparities in the first place. Who better to speak out about what is right, what is possible, than you? And the task force, after the task force submits its final report, the real work will begin to urge the legislature to act. Before this event, I was privileged to talk with Doctors Joy McDaniel, Bryant Ukukwe, Bunny Begay, and Sandy Shee, just to float the idea of the post-bac grads forming their own organization to be a change agent in the spirit of Harvey Brody, to pay it forward and to make it right. And if you choose to do that, I look forward to working with you. That's my message, folks. Thank you.